Welcome everyone, welcome to the last episode of this series. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this tutorial series. Hopefully you're enjoying it and hopefully you're learning. In this final episode, we're going to take a look at adding some sounds as well as adding a score system to our player. And we're also going to make sure that the player can restart the game without actually having to turn it on and off as we currently have it. So yeah, let's dive right in. Currently we have to basically turn the game off and play again. And also, the moment you press play, the guy falls down, which is annoying. So I have to be really quick in catching him, otherwise he falls down. So what I want him to do is I want him to just hover in the air until I make my first jump. So let's do that next, because it's a little annoying. You might have noticed if you're following along here. What we can do is, we have our is alive, right, on our Flapman. But what we can also add is we can add another bool called is playing, so that we know if the user has initiated play. And the moment the user presses jump, we're going to say is playing set to true. All right. Now you can see that every time we press jump, we're going to try to set this bool to is playing, which technically isn't going to be an issue. I just don't like it. It's not very clean. So I want to actually separate that by a branch. And we just want to say if we're not playing, then we set the is playing. If we are playing, we simply skip that and just move along. It doesn't matter at this point, but it's just something that I wanted to show you, that it's good to protect these kind of things, because you don't want to just keep setting a bool every frame, for example. You want to set it if it makes sense. If not, we don't want to set it. So I think that's pretty clean. So now we know whether we're playing or not. So this is currently not doing anything in our game though. So what can we do? Well, in our event begin play, we can, for example, turn off gravity. That would be a pretty neat solution. So let's try that. Let's say set gravity. Is there such? Oh, look at that. Set enable gravity. Perfect. That's what we want. So when we begin play, we want to say gravity to be enabled. No. So gravity disabled. That's the first thing that's going to happen. Then, as we're setting is playing, we can use this little side path to our advantage and say gravity set enable gravity. You can even just write it and you get an option for the capsule, which is the one we want. So gravity enabled, yes. This means, well, I'll just show you what it means. Look at that. How cool is that? The problem is we get trees. We gotta be quick here, but you can, let me show you that again. The moment I click, that's when we actually start going, right? Now you may notice that I didn't actually jump. Like I don't want him to just fall. I want him to actually jump. So you can just join back the flow there. Look at that. So that we set it enabled, we set is playing, we turn on gravity, and then we continue with a jump. That's going to feel a lot better. Let's try that. Yeah, look at that. That's perfect. That's really great. Last thing to do here is we obviously want to make sure that we don't get any blocks until we're playing. This is actually getting a little more tricky now, because now we need to talk to blueprints. Like they need to talk to each other, right? Like the player as the character needs to tell the block spawner if it should spawn blocks or not. And there are ways to do that. Like obviously, okay, so a little disclaimer here. This is not going to be best practice. Best practice would be to have an overall level manager, which would keep track of which state the game is in, such as, is the player dead? Are we playing? Are we in the menu? Like what's going on? And then that would delegate actions to each of your actors and components. However, in this game, we're making such a small game. The scope is so small that I feel like entering that realm, it's a little out of the scope of this tutorial. Just a little tip for you there, but we'll keep it simple for now. So, okay, let's think about this. In our Flapman, we have is playing. We have this bool. So if we could just access this from the block spawner, we could use that as an argument for saying, should we spawn blocks or not? So let's do that. The first thing we got to do is to find the player in the world. All right. So we'll do that by searching for get player pawn. All right, get player pawn. So this is going to return our player's pawn or actor. And we want to store that in a variable. So under variables, you can create a new variable. So let's just call it player so that we have this reference to our player. Obviously, it's not going to be a bool, but what is it going to be though? Because our player's class is actually Flapman, right? That's what we call our blueprint. So if you search for that, there you go. Flapman. That's what it's going to be. So just drag our player in, set player, and we want to set it to whatever our pawn is, right? Now that doesn't work. So why is that? Well, it's because this is just referencing a pawn, and this is actually looking at Flapman, which is a subclass of a pawn. It's a little confusing. We're going to use something called casting. You might have heard about it. So let's just drag that out. We're going to cast, just search for cast. And now it's going to get a little crazy in here because we got to we'll just write it out. Cast to Flapman. Look at that. Cast to Flapman. So this is basically going to take whatever this gets and convert it into a Flapman. It'll assume that it is a Flapman. If it doesn't, if something else comes in here, the cast will fail. And in which case you can do something else, like print an error message. But I know it's going to work, so we're just going to do it this way. You know what? Best practice. Print. Could not convert player pawn to Flapman. See? So if it were to fail, then you'll get an error message. Very nice. Very structured. So we're going to cast. We're going to set the player. Oh, and you got to also plug this. So this is what the cast returns. We want to plug that in. So now we're setting this variable to the player pawn. So now we can drag our player out, get player. So what we're going to do is we're just going to drag this out and we're going to say is playing. Yes, look at that. Get is playing. Perfect. So now inside our block spawner, we have an idea of whether we're playing or not because we did this casting mechanism up here. So now we can say that before we spawn any block, we're going to put a little if statement here. So if the player is playing, we're going to go ahead and spawn our blocks. If not, we do nothing. Let's see if that works. Just hovering. No blocks. So let's let go. Let's go. Let's go. Ah, look at that. Genius. Doesn't get better than that. Now the next step is that when we die, we're basically just stuck here. So why don't we give the player an option to restart the game? I think that's a natural next step so that we can keep playing without having to turn the game off. So again, this should be done by a level manager, but for now we're just going to do it inside our Flapman because it'll keep things a little easier for now. Okay, so when you're in your Flapman here, you might notice that it gets a little hard now to see what the hell's going on. So what you can do to keep things more organized is that you can create comment boxes. So you just select the nodes you want and you hit C and it'll give you a little box. This doesn't actually do anything, but it gives you a way to organize your work. So for example, this has to do with the death animation. So we'll just call this death, right? Now, how are we going to do this? Okay, well, I want it to basically be that if you press the jump button when you're dead, you'll just reset the level. So we're going to want to look here at the jump mechanic and our input action for the jump button, which currently basically says if we're playing, we move over to the jump and then this checks are we alive, right? So this seems like a good opportunity to utilize this little thing. Like, are we alive? False? No. Okay, well, then we want to reset the level. So there's a way you can just reload the level. So just search for level and it'll give you here, open level. That sounds right. Let's try that. And we'll need our level name. So we want to go and check this. So remember, this is actually very sensitive. If you've typed the wrong thing, it won't work. So the safest way is to go to your level, copy that, come back and just paste it in there. Now we know it's the same. So it's a little, it's a little dangerous if you now rename your level, for example, but that's the way it is. So let's just try that. All right, let's die real quick now. So if I die, and now if I click, boom, we restart the level. We're hovering, waiting for me to click. There you go. Awesome. One little crook thing here. If I press really quickly, you saw what happened, right? Like if I press really quickly here, it's just plop. I want to give the player a bit of a delay. Like I want there to be a delay before you can actually reset the level. Partially because I don't want it to be confusing, but also because I want the player to reflect for a moment over the fact that they died, because that's just how cruel I am. You could argue and say that you should put a delay in here, but that's kind of like you press and then you wait 3 seconds and it restarts. And I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be like you can't restart the level until a certain timer has gone off. So the way we can do that is we can create another variable. I know, lots of variable. we'll just call it something like ready to restart, right? And what we're gonna do is when we die at the end here, we're going to set a delay. So we basically, we die, we jump, we add the torque so that we spin. And then after, let's say 1 second, we set ready to restart to be true, right? So after 1 second, you're allowed to restart. So you make sure to compile, go to ready to restart and make sure that this is off by default. So now you need to wait a second before you're ready to restart. What we also do now is we go back to our open level down here. So we try to jump, we're dead, we can't jump, we open our level. But in order for that to come true, we want to make sure that we are ready to restart. Get ready to restart, true, open level. All right, let's try this. See, I click. And then you can go, okay, that felt a little fast. I want to be a little bit more punishing. I want them to really think about the fact that they died. Let's make it a painful 3 seconds. Hell yeah. There you go, 3 second delay. Perfect. That ought to get them thinking. Okay, I'm clicking, and that's it. Excellent. All right, we have a pretty much fully functional game now. You can start your game, you can play, and you never need to turn it off until you're tired of the game and you want to stop playing. Okay, now we're going to get into a little bit more nitty and gritty stuff. So, you know what I want to add a little bit of an animation because we have 2 sprites, remember, in our little dude. So whenever we flap or fart, yeah, I'm 5 years old. Whenever we fart, we want to do a little animation because that's going to be fun. So let's take a look at that. It's going to be pretty simple. So obviously Unreal has a very advanced animation system that you can utilize and have blend states and all this stuff. Again, for the scope of this tutorial, we're just going to do something very simple, but it's going to work just as well. So in your Flapman blueprint, I'm actually going to copy this jump action. Control W to duplicate. Because I just want to keep it separate and neat. And we're going to do a little animation here. So what we can do here is we can just simply drag down our paper sprite and we can say set sprite. Okay. So when we press our jump, we set our sprite. However, again, remember to protect if we are alive. We don't want to change sprites if we're dead. Get is alive. Branch it off. Should be used to this by now. Is alive, true, cool. We don't need to worry about is playing because the moment the player hits the jump button, we're going to start playing. So that's fine. And now the new sprite we can set to be is this. Well, it's a little hard to see, but you know, it is the other one. And then we want to keep that for a moment. So he like, and then he releases, okay? So now we want to set a delay of maybe 1 second, delay, 1 second. And then we want to set sprite. Yeah, we'll just have duplicates, that's fine. Set sprite, the regular one. All right, so now we'll keep that for a second and then go back to the normal one. Let's try. Look at that, that's freaking awesome. Okay, it's just way too slow though. 1 second is way too slow. Let's try something like, you know, 0.2. Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's good. Oh, that reminds me, sound effects. So I've recorded my own little sound effects, you know. So if you look in your content browser, you have your sounds here. You can look at my art. You just press it, you can hear it. I know, I'm amazing. I just, you know, you're learning, you're having fun. Does it get any better than this? I don't think so. Okay, we want to add basically, anytime we jump, we want to add a sound. We're going to create something called a sound cue. So go to sounds and you will find sound cue. And this is what we're going to just call this flap. That's what I'm writing. You can open this up and it'll look familiar again. It'll just look like a regular blueprint, except it has this thing here. So the reason I detached the window is because I want to now take these fart 1 through to 8 and I just want to drag them in. All right. Now you have all these, right? So what are we going to do with these? Well, this is going to be the output. So whenever we call the sound cue, whatever is connected to the output is what we're going to get. So in this case, I want to randomize between these 8 because we don't want the same sound every jump, right? That'd be boring. So we're gonna search for a function called random. We're gonna plug it in here. We're gonna plug it in there. And then you can just keep adding input. So we need 8, we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you just plug the output into here. And that should work. So save that and go to your Flatman and go to your jump mechanic and say if you, so we could put it in the jump inside the jump function, but because we're also calling that when we're dying and I want to play a different sound, I'm not going to actually put it into the jump. I'm just going to put it after here. So okay, so you can just search here. So play sound 2D. Okay, so if you say play sound at location, you can physically put it in 3D where you want it to sound from, and then if you are in headphones or have surround, you will actually sound like it's from there. In this case, however, we don't care. We're just going to play it 2D, so it'll just be completely flat on. So sound, play the sound, and you can see now you can select the cue we created, right? So we want to do the sound cue. There you go. So now it's going to play that and randomize the thing. So that's pretty neat. Let's try. Well, I'm going to have to put my headphones on. Yeah, look at that. How awesome is that? Super immersive sound effects. You're welcome. I know it, you know. Hey, if you made it this far, I'm sure you find it funny too. Right, let's add some more sounds now that we're at it. So if you're just playing a single sound, you don't actually need the sound cue. So in the case of death, for example, in between where we add the torque and the delay, we're going to add a little sound. Play sound, 2D, select, and I have a little death one, fart die. That's the one. Ah, beautiful. And see, now you also got an even better feedback when you die. How awesome is this? So good. So the last thing, I'm going to take these off. The last thing we want to do now is we want to add a score system. It's a little more complicated than it might seem. So we want to do something that every time you pass a tree trunk, you get a point. And I think that it would be cool to add a bean in between the trees, right? You got to keep the fartage going, so you need to eat beans. So you collect the beans as you jump through. That's the logic. Basically, we want to put a little bean in between every block here. So we'll do that. We'll just add a little sprite, paper sprite, bean. Oh, we haven't converted our bean. We need to convert our bean. Sprite actions, create sprite. Great. All right, let's add the bean. Sprite bean. Reset the transform. Perfect. There it is. However, this is going to actually cause us to die. Because remember, we're going to set this to trigger, obviously, because we don't want physics. But if we touch this bean, we're going to die. So we need now a way to make sure that when we touch the bean, we don't die, but that we actually pick up a score. So we need a way to differentiate between these collisions. So for me, the best way to do that is to utilize something called tags. We can tag an object with a tag. So to add a tag to an object, just simply click it and then scroll down. So this is a tree trunk. So this actually, we want this to kill us, right? So you can see here tags, click plus, and you can add a tag. So we'll just call this enemy. I'm going to copy that because spelling is important here. And we'll add the same to the lower trunk, enemy. And the bean, well, we want that to be something else. So we'll call it pick up. All right. With a capital P. Also, make sure to go to your out of bounds and tag this one as well as an enemy. Because now we're going to start filtering things. If you go to your Flatman. Now, the problem here is that we're getting the event actor begin overlap. And we're going to be returning the actor. But if you look closely here, our block spawner, this entire block is the actor. And it's called block. So this is only really going to return block, but we need to know which component we hit. So this is actually not going to work for us anymore. How can we get a different one of these? Well, if you search for it, component overlap, we're not really getting any events. So if you go to your capsule here and you scroll down, you can see that there are events here. So here we can generate new events. So let's look here, on component begin overlap. Perfect, that's exactly what we want. We want the component. Okay, it created it down here, so let's move it back up. And this is awesome because this will basically do the same thing here, but it'll also spit out a component. So this way we can check if the component has a tag or not, or which one. So let's just reroute this one. We'll use this instead. You can basically just delete this now. Now we can drag out our component and we can say component has tag, right? And now we can just put in, we can say enemy. Make sure you spell that the same way. It doesn't have to be enemy. It can be anything you want, but it does need to match up. So keep that in mind. Just gonna give myself some space here. So if the component has tag enemy, we're gonna move along with our death animation, right? If it does not, however, we want to check if it has the pickup one. So if it's false, we want to check if, duplicate that, if the component has tag pickup. Great. And if it does, we want to add a point. Now, currently we don't have a concept of what a point is, so we have to create that. So for me, it makes sense to put that in our game mode that we created first. Remember our BP game mode? I'm going to open this up and then you'll see that you can click here, open full blueprint editor, and you will have something that looks very similar to another blueprint, right? Because it is, after all, a blueprint. But I think it makes sense to keep track of the score here. So I'm going to create a variable and we're going to call it score. Now we don't want that to be bool, but we also don't want it to be a float because we don't want to put, let's say 1.5. We want whole numbers. So we're going to set it to integer, which is basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And we want to create a function that we can access that will just basically add 1 to the score, right? So if you just right click here, stay with me, and you type in increment, you say increment int, and you can just drag your score and it's going to be a get because we're just plugging it in. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to take in whatever integer we feed it and modify it and add 1. So whatever we have, let's say we have 3, it's going to take it and add 1, which will make it 4. You can even double click this and see what's actually happening in there. See, there's nothing hidden in Unreal. You can always access things and see what they're doing, which is really handy actually. So you can see that it's manipulating the int and it's adding 1. Simple, but very useful. So we're going to turn this into a function. So right click, collapse the function, and we'll name this add point. And that's it. And you can even delete this now because we're not actually going to call it from anywhere here. No, we're just going to leave it there. And then we can access this from our player. So whenever we hit a bean, we're going to call this function and it'll add a score. So go to your Flappy. So the first thing we need to do is sort of similar to what we did with our block spawner, where we found our player in order to check if we're playing the game or not, so that it knows when to spawn. We can actually find our game mode. So if you just drag out from here, just type game mode, and you can see get game mode. So this is exactly what we want. Sorry, you don't need to drag out. Obviously, again, we need to cast this because we created a custom class for our game mode. So let's call cast to, and what do we call it? BP game mode, right? Yeah, so you can see cast to BP game mode. We're gonna put our object in here. We're gonna say true. And now we have a concept of our game mode. We're just gonna simply call the function. So just drag that out and search for add point. And look at that. Add point is there and it beautifully connects. So now every time we collect a bean, we should be adding a point. It's getting a little messy. I know this is sort of the downside with Blueprint, but hey, at least you don't have to write code. You can even name this nicely here. See, add point. There you go. You can even make it a little color here. Color, red, add point, green. Great. Death, not good. Red. Let's just, before we play, we just want to also, when we touch the bean, we want to actually destroy the bean so that it goes away. We're going to go to our block. So basically we want to just check what is it hitting, like what happened. If the bean collides with anything, we want to destroy it because there's only one thing it can collide with, which is the player, right? So if you select your bean and you just on component begin overlap, again, you drag that out, you see this is now relating to the bean. Whenever that happens, we can just call the bean and say destroy component. All right. Boom. So whenever anything hits the bean, it'll be destroyed. Compile that and let's try this and see what happens. Everything is still working. That's great. Whoa. Okay, and I died. But we did collect the bean. Did you see that? Now the question is, are we actually getting a score? Because there's no way for us to see that. So I died. Oh, wait, wait. So what's happening here? Oh, okay. So now we get a little bit of an error message. And that is because, I will show you, we are basically, when we're touching the bean, we're killing the bean. But at the same time, Flatman is trying to access the bean, right? Because it's trying to look, component has tag, right? It's trying to look for a tag. So if we try to do something here and the component is already destroyed, you're gonna run into issues. So there's a little node you can use for that, and it's called isValid. So search for isValid, and it'll be the one that has a little question mark next to it. So it's that one. We can basically just check before we do anything at all in this flow. Let's just check if whatever we touched is valid. Take the component is valid. If it is valid, we continue, right? The problem now though is, so this is the kind of the, I'm actually making a few mistakes here on purpose so that you learn something. So if you think about this, if it happens that the bean gets destroyed before we add the score down here, this is going to return non-valid and the user will not get the score. I hope that makes sense. So I think the best way is to actually just move this over to the bean so that before we destroy the bean, we add the score, and that way we know we'll be fine. We still want to maintain this is valid though, because otherwise we'll get that error message again. So you can just cut that, literally compile, go back into your block, and you know, add it back in here. So just move this over, right? We don't need to check if it's a pickup anymore because we already know that. We just simply go ahead and do it. Boom, add point, and destroy. And you can comment this, kill bean. And let's try that. Okay, not working. Oh yeah. We missed the bean. So that feels a little unfair. I don't actually want the player to be able to actually skip a bean. That seems a little unfair. If you make it through the tree, you succeed. So a little cheat you can do to fix that is just to go to your bean, edit collision, and just make it a little bigger. Sure, that's enough. Save that. Yeah, I think that's good. Now there's no way you'll make it through without touching that collider. All right, so now we're collecting. Now we just want to make sure that we are actually also adding score. So we're going to go back to our game mode. And just for now, we're going to be constantly every frame printing our score. So get score, it converts it to a string, and we're going to be seeing our score in every frame. Whoa, okay, so 0. So we expect this to turn into a 1. And we do 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Perfect. Okay, now all we gotta do really is we gotta send this to the screen. So this is gonna be the last step in this tutorial, and that is to add a user interface element and display the score. We don't want this print message, it's pretty ugly, but we know that it works, so that's great. So we can just delete that now. We need a way to send this to the screen. So setting up an interface in Unreal is a little more complicated than, for example, in Unity, if you've tried that. It's not something you just figure out on your own, but it's not that hard. I'll walk you through it. So check this out. It's a little confusing, but so basically what you need to do first is you need to create a file or an asset that is your interface. So you can do that by just going to your content. We're going to add a new folder called UI. Anything UI related we'll create in here. So you go to user interface and you're going to create something that's called a widget blueprint. Okay, so create that and call it just score interface, for example. And so if you double click that, you'll notice that you're now in a designer space. But if you check up here, you also have a graph, which is identical to your other blueprint. So it's very, I mean, it's so awesome in here. I just love this program. But anyways, that's besides the point. In this designer, you can now design your UI. You can add a little bit of text and stuff like that. So that's what we want to do. We want our score. I don't know where to put it, maybe up here. You'll see this little flowery kind of guy. This is going to be your anchor. So whatever screen resolution or size, the text block will be relative to this anchor, a percentage of the screen, right? So if you wanted it to always be centered, you would want to put this in the center of the screen and then put that there. We don't want to do that though. I want to have the probably somewhere around here. I'm gonna make the text a little bigger, I think. So you can go to font, let's call it 45. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, but so you'll notice though that if I hit play now, we don't see that here. And why is that? Well, it's because we haven't assigned it to our game. So that's the confusing part. You have to go to your game mode. Well, you can do it anywhere, but I'm going to do it in my game mode because I feel like that's a good place to handle things. Basically, what's going to happen here is anytime this game mode is used, it's going to draw the interface. So if you had another level, for example, it's still going to draw the score because the game mode will be called. What you have to do is, okay, this is super confusing. You're just going to have to do it, sort of. So when we start the game, we're going to create widget. You just search for widget and create widget. Okay, and now you select your class. Basically, this is creating an instance of this widget in the game. So score interface, we called it, great. And the return value, well, basically we've created the widget, but we haven't sent it to the screen yet. So you assign the return value to be add to viewport, okay? Excellent, so now it's gonna draw on the screen. So let's try this. Awesome, look at that. Now we have the text block. So I know it's a little confusing, but you just gotta get used to it, sort of. But excellent, we have our interface. Now all we gotta do is just make sure that it's actually pulling our score. So how do we do that? Well, if you go back into this widget we created, you'll see that the text is driven by what we put in here. So I can say hello, press enter, and you get that. But that's not what we want though. I'm just gonna write score here so that we know what we want to be there. And then you'll have a little option here. You'll see that it says bind. So click there and say create binding. Ooh. Okay, so now you'll see that we were sent over to the graph instead of the designer, and it has created a function for us called getText. So I'm gonna rename that to getScore, all right? And so if you go back over to the designer now, you'll see that our score is now bound to getScore, which is the function we just created. So if we go over here, this return value is going to be what the text displays. So this is a perfect opportunity for us to grab the score and plug it in there, and then it'll just update to that. Super neat. So again, so we got to restore a reference to our game mode. So we got to do our little cast trick again. So let me go over to the event graph. So this looks a little different. So you got event construct. This is basically when the widget is constructed. So that's pretty much like begin play. Let's just call it that for now. We're gonna wanna add a new variable. We're gonna call it game mode because we need to store a reference to our game mode so we can get our score. Now that's not gonna be a Boolean. It's going to be a BP game mode, right? Because that's what we named it. We're gonna drag this down and we're gonna set game mode, but we need to get our game mode. So get game mode, just like before, but we need to now cast it over to our special blueprint game mode. We could have named that something a little more different to make it clearer, but I hope that makes sense, that we need to now cast to BP game mode, which is what we created, and then that return value can go in here. So plug that into our event construct and then set it. Okay, so now we have a reference to the game mode that's running this game and counting the score. So now we can move over to our getScore function, which will set the text and drag in the game mode, get game mode, right? And we want to grab the score, get score. Excellent. Because we have a variable called score. And we're just going to plunk that into here and it'll convert integer to text, which is exactly what we want. And in theory, this should automatically work. Let's test it. Well, not automatically, we have to do it first, but I'm gonna just go and save all and try this. So yeah, we got 0. That's awesome. That's a good sign. It converted to a 0, and now let's see. All right. Look at that. And we're playing, and we got score counting. What score can you get? I can keep going forever. E! Can we die? Yes. I want to play with headphones. We did it. We made a game. Oh shit. And we can click to restart. Yep. Okay, well, congratulations. If you made it this far, you just created very simple, but you know, it's a game, right? Anyways, I hope you learned something. If you liked the video and you want to see more videos like this, then consider subscribing. Helps me a lot. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.